Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for coming and joining me today. Our topic is how to choose reading. How do you choose what your children will read? How do you choose what you will read? Where are your lines and how do you draw them? So today we have a very big topic and I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface, but I'm going to narrow this down a little bit to how we choose reading for our students and our children, and especially how we choose whether something is valuable or not valuable. So let's just get started today. The first thing we need to know when we're choosing reading for our students is their reading level. And this is something that is debated and difficult to figure out. And really, it's a little bit irrelevant whether we can put a number on it. It doesn't really matter what grade level they're reading at or Lexile level. Those things are kind of arbitrary. What really matters is the book that you choose, that it's not too easy and it's not too hard. So how do we know if a book is just right? So if it's too easy, when you randomly open to a middle page, so you might be at the library, you might be standing at your bookshelf and you say, hey, come over here, read this for me. And you just open randomly in the middle of the page and you just have middle of the book and you just have them start to read. If they know every word, if they're like flying through it and then they can tell you exactly what happened, it's really too easy for them. And it might be super enjoyable reading, and probably students are going to choose books like that because we all want to read below our reading level because it's fun. We don't have to work hard. We don't like to work hard, but we want our books to be just a little bit challenging so that we continue to grow. The next thing that we look for is, are there lots of tricky words? So maybe when they're reading, they come across lots of words that they have trouble pronouncing. Maybe they don't understand what the words are. Maybe they identify them as the wrong words. And when you ask them what it's about, they'll forget lots of important information. They say they've forgotten it, but actually they haven't probably understood it. And they'll be reading quite slowly. So our Just Right book is where students know most of the words, but they still have to think about some of them, but they're still able to understand the story. So there's not so many difficult words that they are stuck figuring out the words and lose track of what's happening. And they're able to read at a somewhat steady pace. They might have to slow down for some more difficult words, but they're able to figure it out as they go. Now, here is the difficult piece. So I guess the first question you need to ask when you're looking for books or choosing books is, what's the purpose of the book that I'm choosing? Sometimes it's just for fun. If it's just for fun, below reading level is fine. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. So often parents say, I just want my student to enjoy reading. So we let them read whatever they want. They read interesting books. They read books that are below their reading level. And we all do that from time to time. When I go on holidays, I'm not taking super difficult books. I'm taking books that I can put down, that I can follow easily, that I can pretty much listen to a conversation while I'm reading the book. And so those are the kinds of easy books that we choose for leisure reading. If your book choice is to have more impact than that, if your book choice is to help them improve the vocabulary, improve their comprehension skills, then you're really going to want to choose more carefully. And you're going to want to not necessarily let them just quit reading a book because they find it a little bit challenging or not super interesting. So you have to choose your purpose. Like everything in life, like everything in homeschool, we have to know why we're doing what we're doing because that's how we're going to determine what is going to be effective for our path. If our path is to make sure that our student reads a book every month and it doesn't matter to us, we just want them to be reading something, then letting them read anything is absolutely fine. It's, out there, and eventually students like that sometimes start to read more difficult things on their own because they get kind of bored reading. And that's something that might happen if they're reading well below their reading level, is the stories get kind of boring after a while. They're predictable and they're not interesting. If your goal is reading for academic purposes and you want them to learn and grow, you're going to make completely different choices. Now, here's another thing that we haven't talked about so far is what about worldview and what about the content of the books? So far, we've talked about reading level and comprehension, but what about what's in the books? What about the content? And the first thing I have to say is you are the parent and you know your child best and you know what they can handle and what they can't handle. And don't let anyone tell you that your child should read this list of books because this is what's required. If you don't think your child is up to reading some kind of content, don't give it to them. Bridge to Terabithia is a beautiful book. I got it. I intended to read it with my son. I read the book. I cried my eyes out, and there was no way I could give it to him to read. There was no way that we could read it together. I'm sure it's a beautiful book. It's on tons of reading lists. It's an amazing piece of work. I don't want to read it again. It still breaks my heart every time I think of it. So obviously, amazing writing because it had such an effect on me. But my son was not in a place to read that, and I guess maybe I wasn't. And it was just a very, very difficult read for me, even though the vocabulary was well under me, even though the story was beautiful, even though the writing was amazing, even though it makes lots of book lists. You have to know what is in your child's best interest. And some students just are not up for emotional reads. I try to avoid them myself. I don't need any help being on that roller coaster. So sometimes we need to make choices for our own and our students' benefit. Here is the other thing we're going to talk about. This idea that because the Bible says that whatever things are good and true and pure and lovely, to think on these things, that we have to make sure that every book we read has nothing impure or evil in it. And this is going to be a personal choice on your part, and for your family, you have to make these choices. At some point, your students will be making these choices for themselves. So it's a good conversation point to have with them about why you choose certain books, why you don't choose certain books. Personally, I have lines that I won't cross. And, I make different choices for my classes than I do for my family. And it's important, though, to know that it is okay to have things enter our world that is not just pure goodness. First of all, I can't think of a book that's been written that doesn't have some kind of evil in it. That's really the classic story of all time. It starts in Eden and it continues to today, that we're confronted with evil. And so I want to tell you the story of Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty's parents had this wonderful little baby, and they wanted to protect that baby from all outside evil. So when they had their party, welcoming her into the world, they didn't invite the Wicked Witch. Now, who, of course, would invite a Wicked Witch to a baby shower? Of course not. But this is symbolic. This is them trying to keep all evil away from their baby. And we want to keep our children safe. We want to protect them from all evil. And then there's this prophecy that she's going to prick her finger with a needle. So they try to rid the whole kingdom of needles so that, this can't happen to their dear child. Well, what happens when Sleeping Beauty comes into the real world? She has no idea about evil or how to deal with it or what to do. And that's one thing that happens when we protect our children too much. Is the reality is evil is going to come into their world, and sometimes books are a great place to introduce that evil, to be able to talk about it, to be able to process it, and to learn how to react to it. One of the things that I did with my daughter, and this is, sort of related, is, the first time she was starting to go to the park by herself, we practiced like what to do if somebody comes and tries to take her. It's the middle of the afternoon, we homeschool, she goes to the park. What if someone comes and tries to get her to come with them? And we practiced that. What if I just wanted to keep her from knowing that evil was out there? Like what if we didn't practice that? So sometimes books are a great opportunity to practice our response to evil in the world. It's a good way for us to see how people respond well and respond poorly, and allowing our students to interact with evil, to recognize it, to see it for what it is, and to see that it hides itself in truth, to see that it is sneaky. That is a valuable thing. The other thing that happens in a world where we try to limit all exposure to outside influence is that we end up in an echo chamber where everyone is saying exactly the same things and everyone believes exactly the same things. And that seems like such a beautiful world. Wouldn't it be a beautiful world if everyone thought just like me? No, it wouldn't be a beautiful world. And we lose so much value by not recognizing that other people think and believe differently than us. And what happens in an echo chamber is that we start to really believe deep down that we have the only answer and that everyone out there must be just stupid if they think otherwise. Now, that is not to say that I don't believe that Jesus is the only way. I'm not opening doors to, everything is equal, not for a second. But it is valuable to say, this is what I believe. This is what somebody else believes, and that doesn't make them stupid. That makes them equal and loved by God and important and valuable. And I can have a conversation with them because I'm not afraid to deal with that issue. So it's very important, I believe, for students to see and hear things that are not just good and true and pure. In our minds, we want to focus on God. We want to focus on what's good and pure. But bringing up all of these other things in books is a wonderful way to have family discussion. So I'm a huge, huge advocate for reading together as a family, doing read alouds, sharing the book, pass it around. You read a chapter, or you read a page and you read a page. Talk about the things that come up. What does that person believe? Why do they think that? What would make them see the world that way? What experiences has that person had that makes them see the world that way? What does the author believe? Let's go find out what the author believes about the world and what they believe to be true about faith. Let's find out what messages they're sending us. We're training our children by being leaders in education. We're training our children how to do it when they see us do it with them. So instead of being autocratic and choosing and limiting, we can have so much more impact when we discuss it. Because exposure to outside beliefs and challenging beliefs is something that's going to happen whether we like it or not. And the very best thing we can do is make sure our students and our children and we ourselves know exactly what we believe, know why we believe it. We hold fast to that faith, and then we have exposure from the outside world. We can't avoid it, unless you are not going to have a TV or a phone or a radio or a newspaper or a magazine or go to the theater or really leave your house. You're going to be exposed to outside and challenging beliefs. And it's through exposure, through controlled exposure to outside beliefs, that we can really make strong people of our youth. When we don't have these discussions, when we don't allow them to be exposed to outside influences, when we have concerns about the things that they're reading, or when we have concerns about the things that they're listening to, having that discussion with them and asking questions and hearing their point of view, especially as they become closer to adulthood. Of course, the younger your student is, the more control you have over their world. But the older they get, the more control they're going to have. My son is super tech savvy, and we learned very, very soon that we could not control what he did and where he went on the internet without just removing it. And then he'd just get it somewhere else. So we had to have discussions. We had to talk and we had to share and we had to show our concerns and hear his concerns. And we had to have those discussions. And those discussions are what have made him the person he is today. The person who can look at what other people believe and make a choice for himself. And that's the kind of adults that we want to raise. We're not looking to raise children. We are, after all, looking to raise adults. So thank you so much for coming today to hear my views about how to choose books. Please tell me. I would love to hear your opinions and your thoughts in the comments below, or email me and let me know what you think. I'd love to hear more about books that you would recommend or books that you don't recommend, or your thoughts about what I have to say today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely weekend. Happy Friday.